Well, we begin tonight with Donald Trump, who, as you know, has scored a stunning victory in the US election. But what's he likely to do with it? Well, we've only got his words to go on. His second term, he says, will be a little bit nasty at times, and maybe at the beginning in particular. He will, he says, introduce the largest deportation program for illegal immigrants in American history. He's spoken of draining the swamp, which could mean putting the law enforcement agencies onto his political and maybe even his journalistic enemies. Drill, baby, drill is likely to mean going for oil wherever it can be found. He'll potentially force Ukraine to the table for peace talks with Russia under conditions which are likely to be pretty unfavorable to the Ukrainians. He may allow Benjamin Netanyahu a free hand against his adversaries in the Middle East. He could well impose hostile tariffs against China and maybe against Europe as well, which some of his critics have called reckless protectionism. And he thinks the warnings on climate change are just a scam. Well, let's get the perspectives of our guest analysts on this and the other news and issues of the week. And I'm suitably delighted to say that I'm joined now in the studio by the current affairs analyst and dean of the School of Postgraduate Studies at Baze University, Abuja, Professor Abiodun Adeniyi, and by Arise News analyst and former chairman of the editorial board of Daily Trust newspaper, Mahmood Jega. And from our off-site studio, I'm also joined by the global security and governance analyst, Paul Ejime. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Let me start with you, Professor Abiodun. This has been a disturbing campaign in many ways, marked by violence and deep anger, inconsistencies, lying. As you followed the twists and turns of this election, what did you take away from it?
Yeah, very interesting, no doubt. Typical of America's election, the most powerful military in the world, the most prosperous economy in the world, irrespective of the rise of China. So whatever transpires there at the level of politics is bound to catch the interest of everyone that is conscious, that want to be informed about the prospect or the things that might happen around the world. Again, considering the fact that America is reputatively the policeman of the world. But yes, again, it's a reminder of the fact that, politics, like Aristotle told us ages ago, it's not about rationality, it's not about morality, not about ethics, because if all those all those values were to come into place, you would not be expecting Donald Trump to win. But again, he has won. And ironically, again, you will say, okay, he's probably won again as a counter, to countermand, some other projections or some other affairs that will see snowballing with the Democrats in terms of the ultra freedom. They were somewhat bringing America and maybe to a larger extent the rest of the world to begin to think about some kind of freedom that we never thought about before. But he has emerged again to counter all that. On the other hand, you will say, okay, he too is not quite ethical, considering all the baggage around him, conviction as a felon and all the controversies, the kind of things he says and all of that. But it's America, it is for America's people to decide. They have decided, they have chosen him. I think what should interest us next it should be rather, the impact his administration will make on the rest of the world with respect to peace, with respect to war, and of course there are some flashpoints that will interest us. The Ukrainian war is on, the Middle East is on, and of course what is going to be is in interest in Africa. To what extent will he be interested in Africa? But overall, I think he's going to do 4 years. That's the time he's going to do. I do not see anything changing fundamentally. He will do his 4 years and leave the stage for another person to come. It will just, it will make some impact, but again, the world is not going to come to an end on account of the rise or the second coming of Donald Trump. Yes.
So let's put it that way. But let me come to you, Mahmood Jega. And this campaign has been historic in a number of ways, not least of which is the fact that the incumbent president, Joe Biden, who was running for re-election, was forced to abandon his presidential bid. Then you bring in the fact that the Republican candidate, Donald Trump, who was convicted of felonies earlier in the year, was running to regain the office he lost. And all of this had no modern precedent, especially when you add 2 assassination attempts.
Honestly, I have been following American elections since 1976 as a secondary school junior student. That time, mostly in Time magazine. We didn't have CNN and things like that. And there, as you said, never really was an election like this. I mean, I can't remember any person, as Prof said, with so much personal and political baggage, 34 criminal convictions, sex scandals, outrageous talk, and most of the world, it's just that American society has changed fundamentally, because even 20 years ago, anybody who did 1/10 of what Donald Trump did will get nowhere near the White House. I mean, in 1988, I remember Senator Gary Hart, the Miami Herald published a picture of him on holiday in the Caribbean with a girl sitting on his lap.
Bimini.
That was the end of his presidential.
The slogan became, "Would you like to go to Bimini?"
Exactly.
I remember that.
Exactly, that kind of thing. But most of the world, I'm sure, was shocked and appalled by the return. I think the only places probably where there was some happiness would be maybe the Prime Minister of Israel, the President of Russia, and possibly the President of North Korea. These are the only 3 people I can think of who are probably happy. But all the NATO countries, most of Western Europe, the whole of Latin America, and most of the Middle East and Asia, not to mention Africa, was shocked and appalled. What he does inside the United States is the concern of the Americans who voted him in, but we are concerned about the impact that he will have on the rest of the world. And the American president is actually more powerful and more impactful abroad than he is within the country. At least the United States, they have some strong institutions, judicial and others, that can stop some excesses. But it is abroad where he has this 2 million man army with all kinds of, and as you said, we hope he doesn't bring the world to an end with the 17,000 nuclear missiles at his disposal. But how he handles the 2 ongoing wars. Although during his first term, he bragged that he was anti-war, that during his 4 years he did not involve the United States in any war, which is good. But this time there are at least two ongoing major wars, and how he handles them is very important. But we will stand to see, because some of the American analysts are saying that, look, the record of Donald Trump during his first term is that he does not do everything that he says he is going to do. Well, we hope that is the case.
Yes, certainly. And let me come to you, Paul Ejime. Thank you for your patience. You're a little bit away from us, but I know that you are hearing the discussion, and we're looking forward to your active participation. Lots of drama, lots of division, lots of twists and turns in that American election. How much of it is the state of America in terms of where the economy is and where the politics is? And how much of it, as has been suggested here, is the involvement of Donald Trump as a very polarizing figure?
Thank you, Charles, and dear Professor Solo, and then the viewers. They have laid the foundation. But one thing I wanted us to distill from here, if we wanted to know why Trump won and why, or what has won again, against all odds, and why those who thought he wouldn't win, are disappointed. Trump is a disruptor. And one thing we should also get from the American election is the trajectory that democracy is going. Democracy will surprise us and continues to surprise us. It is now beginning to show itself as a big man, personalized kind of thing that you can, when you capture, because what has happened, nobody, Trump is unfiltered, you know, very brash, and then says this as it is, and that is a typical American. But nobody, in the public, before the camera, they put up a very good face, but in themselves, what is happening is that the Caucasians feel that they are losing it. And Trump is the one telling them, I am here for you. I can do it for you. And look at what played at this election. Economy, immigration, and then the fact that he's saying, listen, they want to take, some people are eating our pets and our dogs, and we don't want them here. This government of Biden and Kamala, they are, you know, shipping them here to take your jobs. And there will be no security. Economy will suffer. And these Americans bought into that. So this is somebody who wears as a badge of honor something that ought to, you know, make people be ashamed or even end up in jail like the professors are saying. So why did it happen? Trump wants to, like, and in so many places, people are tired. People are tired of the status quo. People are tired of the pro-establishment people. They haven't, you know, they are not delivering on what they call a dividend of democracy. You remember before now, there was an election in South Africa. What happened? ANC almost lost. In France, in Germany, in India. Things are taking on a new form that people should also look at. And not just think that democracy is about, you know, political party. And this is, he has, in fact, there is no Republicans. Some people will say Trump is synonymous with, or he has taken over the Republican Party. And you see that there are many people who were against him. He managed to appeal to some of them. The vice president was somebody who said all nasty things about Trump, but he's back. Now he's one of the you know, people campaigning for him. So he has something that political analysts, political students of political science will have to study and to know what is happening to democracy across the world, because democracy is now is unraveling, and then it requires those who are governing. Even in Nigeria, we should also look at it. Can I also tell you something? That Trump is, you know, he believes in bilateral, you know, system instead of multilateral. You'll be surprised that our Dangote can strike something about oil, and then Dangote and Nigeria can also benefit from that. This is part of what, in the season consistency, there is a predictability. You know what you stand for. Unlike these other people that can promise rain and then give you fire.
Right. Okay. Well, thanks for that. And just as a final note, and so we can move on from the Donald Trump election victory, Professor Adeniyi, do you see any basis for comparison between the 2024 US election and the 2023 Nigerian election?
Oh, plenty of them, really, Charles. You know, we were happy at the seamlessness. You know, quite heartening to see the openness. You know, and even as we are talking, I'm not aware that the election result has been officially declared. But of course, we know who won the election after all. In fact, by the time I think towards the end of the day of the election, we were already sure of who was going to win. And of course, you know, there are no regulations with respect to, you know, asking sections of institutions not to declare the results. And of course, we forget about the idiosyncrasy of Trump. You know, we didn't see much complaint around rigging, you know, around resort to court, the kind of things that we unfortunately see around us. No record of violence. You know, lots of comparison, and of course, so much for us to learn from how Americans' election actually transpires. Right. And of course, we're also happy. I read some reports that INEC officials were also there on for monitoring reasons. You know, it's not just about visiting the place. It's also important for them to come back with good lessons so that we can make a conscious effort at improving our own electioneering process, especially with respect to logistics, with respect to violence, even though that's not primarily a responsibility, but our security agencies could also learn some lessons from it, you know. Right. And of course, the media too, you know, plenty areas in which we can actually draw lessons. But it's up to us, not just to learn the lessons, but of course to be concerned about ensuring that those lessons matter, you know, that they are reflected in how we do our own business, as the case could be.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Let's move on and talk about another burning light bulb issue that creates huge anxiety in Nigeria: electricity, or the lack of it. In a country blighted by decades of power cuts, the collapse of the national grid has become the rule rather than the exception. 10 times it has crashed this year, the latest just 24 hours ago, and the government seemingly unable to shed light, in a manner of speaking, on that very rather dark subject of Nigeria's power pinch. So could the country's electricity crunch be about to get much worse? Well, let me come to you, Mahmood Jega. The impact of the frustration of this ongoing instability at the national grid is being really deeply felt by millions of struggling Nigerians, isn't it? I mean, fixing Nigeria's electricity has become something like Sisyphus trying to find ways to push the rock up the hill, hasn't it?
Honestly, it has been a recurring problem in Nigeria for as long as anyone will remember. The problem is that this frequent collapse of the national grid, 10 times this year alone and several times last year, has really reached epidemic proportions. And really, if we don't get over this problem, I mean, we are complaining that the power generation is low, the transmission is poor, and the distribution is chaotic. And then on top of that, you have this problem of complete collapse of the national grid to throw the whole country in darkness. Now, the insecurity aspect of it is very clear. And some of it, of course, is of citizens' own making. I was just seeing in one newspaper that when we had the 24-hour collapse of the national grid, in Jos alone, the electricity company said 80 transformers were vandalized. People just moved in. Since there is no power, they removed all kinds of things. So even by the time the grid is restored, how can you have power? The indiscipline is just too glaring. And all talk of economic recovery. I think only yesterday the president gave an assurance that the national economy is on the rebound due to reform. Without electricity, there is not going to be any economic rebound if the national grid collapses virtually every week as it is now becoming. I don't know what the government can or should do, but real emergency and drastic measures are required. I remember writing 15 years ago that, half jokingly, that why don't we go to Ukraine before they entered this war and hire a floating power station of 10,000 megawatts, which they have standing off the Antarctic coast. Bring it to Lagos, connect it to the national grid. We have 10,000 megawatts to start with before you now sit down and plan how to solve the problem on a permanent basis. That is what we call emergency measures. I don't know whether it is technically feasible, but I think they should consider it.
Yes, that's. I think at this point, most Nigerians would agree with you. It's desperate circumstances call for desperate measures. And Paul Ejime in our off-site studio, last year, Nigeria enacted a law that allows states to generate and transmit power, which was an attempt to reduce the burden on the national grid and to attract investors to that sector. But not much apparently has moved as a result, has it?
Yes, Charles, because somebody, I think, it's the individual greed that is driving the greed collapse, as a manner of speaking. Greedy, Nigeria, we are greedy. We cannot, fix things on our own. Everybody is acquiring. The governors are there because at times you talk about governance as if it stops in Abuja or the federal government. The governors are there. All the money that they are collecting, they are also doing internally generated revenue. What now that, because before now they could cite the fact that they have not been given that legal guarantee or opportunity. But now, what is holding it? By the way, there was a time, a minister that was there came when Nigerians thought that they had their own who could deliver. I don't want to mention his name. I'm not trying to advertise him. But it is just that we are not, we are callous. We are, we're becoming insensitive to the suffering of the ordinary person. We are, profit-oriented, that we are not looking at tomorrow. Forget this. These excuses they give about the collapse is laughable. Because how much power are you generating? You are generating under 5,000, and you need about 20. It doesn't matter whether you are not going to perform any magic, because you can't give what you don't have. So the position is that Nigeria is not generating enough, and so cannot serve it. If you like they try to tell you about band A, band B. Somebody called it bandits. I don't want to have anything to do with the bandits. Come and give me electricity. We are not generating enough because of incompetence, because of the inefficiency and greed, corruption. And for those they want you to continue to buy generating sets, just like in oil. They import because it's more lucrative for the cabals. We now have a cabal in electricity, NEPA and all that. So that is what is happening. It cannot happen unless and until we have a deliberate policy, both at the local level, state level, and then the national level, to make sure that we focus, invest in it, and then make sure that we get the right, what you call, returns on investment. Right. That is power. Without power, nothing can happen. Okay. There is no industry. There is no, even the ordinary artisans, they can't do anything. Right. The vulcanizers and others. And then, so you cannot even attract foreign investors.
Right, okay. Well, it's interesting that you mentioned there, Paul, about generators, because according to the Ministry of Power in Nigeria, this country gets 40,000 megawatts from petrol-powered generators, yet its national grid, which could potentially generate 13,000 megawatts, can only transmit 4,000. Now, let me come to you, Prof, so that you can conclude this part of the discussion for us before we move on. As both Paul Ejime and Mahmoud Jega said, the economy is bad, there are few jobs, and people are struggling with the cost of living crisis, there's food insecurity, and now on top of that, the electricity grid, which has been tottering along for some time, now seems on the verge of total collapse. Do you think it's likely to get worse, or do you believe that it'll get back up in the short to medium term? How do you think Nigeria's future with electricity will play out?
Okay, excellent. Like you said, my colleagues have been very exhaustive on this. And permit me, Charles, to give this first-person example. About 10 years ago, I was privileged to be a consultant to the Enugu Electricity Distribution Company. And we went around, all the states of the Southeast, trying to look at the facilities, placed. It was very shocking to see that the facilities that we saw were those ones provided from the 60s, sometimes even far beyond the 60s. And of course, there was no evidence, that those facilities were being replaced. So if we are seeing the collapse of some of these facilities now, the national grid, I mean, it shouldn't be surprising, really, and it speaks to the poor maintenance culture, added to the corruption problem that Paul mentioned, and of course, what do we do in this circumstance? Yes, we have a power minister now who seems to be very active lately. I mean, beyond the activity we are seeing from the ministry is the need, for maybe some level of emergency in this sector, considering how vital, how critical electricity is, to powering the economy that is already on the tailspin.
Okay. Well, I hope the government are listening to you, and you made some really sterling contributions here. We shall continue the chat. You're watching Arise Prime Time. Plenty more still ahead as we continue our analysis of the week that was. Stay with us. Welcome back to Arise Prime Time, where we offer perspectives on the news and talking points of the day. I'm Charles Anyegolu. Now, this week, the Nigerian authorities dropped treason charges against more than 30 anti-government child protesters. They were freed after footage of them emerged collapsing in court, apparently due to malnourishment, footage that sparked outrage across Nigeria and beyond, and prompted President Tinubu to not only call for the release of the minors, but also for the police and other officials involved in the arrests and legal processes to be investigated. Well, let's continue our chat with our guest analysts on this and the other key stories of the week. And still with me, the current affairs analyst and dean of the School of Postgraduate Studies at Baze University, Abuja, Professor Abiodun Adeniyi, Arise News analyst and former chairman of the editorial board of Daily Trust newspaper, Mahmood Jega, and with me from our off-site studio, the global security and governance analyst, Paul Ejime. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for staying with us. Let me come to you, Mahmood. Those children had been detained for upwards of 2 months for their alleged participation in protests against the cost of living crisis. And the result was that they looked terribly shabby, horribly malnourished, and were collapsing in court from exhaustion. Is there any way to justify their incarceration and treatment?
It was one of the biggest scandals of the modern day, honestly, because so many things together. The appearance of the boys was what caused great shock all over the country. They clearly looked malnourished, they were starving, some were even collapsing. And then the fact that we had almost forgotten about the end hunger protest because it took place 3 months ago. Then their age, because these were all minors, very small. As one son said, they should have been charged to a magistrate court for mischief and destruction of property and would have gotten a few months in prison. Then there was the nature of the charge. You take these small starving children and you say terrorism and treason. And in Nigeria, I mean, at least in the last 10 years, what we know as terrorism is like the Madala Church bombing on Christmas Day, or the Nyanya bus bombing, the Maiduguri Monday Market bombing, or the attack on the Central Mosque in Kano during Friday. That's the meaning. But you really devalue the meaning of terrorism when you say children that climbed poles and wrecked traffic light. That's terrorism. And treason, for goodness sake. The last time we heard about treasonable felony was during the military era. Anytime someone tried to overthrow the military governments and they capture him, they say treason. Even that time the media was questioning it. They said, no, but this is an offense against you, not against the whole country. But for goodness sake, the end hunger protest, which the government itself kept saying that citizens have the right to protest, although they should do so peacefully and in an orderly manner. How could that constitute treason when most of the country sympathized? Even if most people didn't participate, they sympathized because they were protesting the cost of living. So those two charges. And then the statements by the police and the other officials were also very shocking. Like the Inspector General spokesman who said the collapsing in the court was stage managed. How can you say it was stage managed when we could all see that children were funny? So many things came together to make it really a terrible scandal, and we hope we have seen the end of it.
Yeah, we certainly hope so. Let me go to our off-site studio and speak to you, Paul Ejime. How much has their case, which of course was widely publicized and sparked outrage, I mean, how much has their case shed light on the deteriorating human rights situation in this country? Because even the president was appalled and ordered an investigation of the law enforcement agents involved in the arrest and prosecution of these children.
Yes, Charles, if there was any iota of or scintilla of thread of doubts about where Nigeria is headed as far as human rights and rule of law is concerned, do you know that these children were brought out because some activists had gone to court because they said that they were missing. So they now ordered that they should be brought. That was why they brought them in court. Otherwise, they would have just languished there and died. And then you look at, and you ask, look at the irony, the correctional centers. You change them from prison, from jail, you call them correctional. What are you correcting here other than you are punishing and are committing atrocities in this? Then you look at the police. Then you look at the lawyers that are representing government. Then you look at the judge that even adjourned the case before the president in his magnanimity now said, listen, these are parents. Will you allow such a thing to happen to your child? Treason, for what? Some of them were waving Russian flags and so on, and so what? Are people not waving American and other flags when they are jubilating? Oh my goodness! So this is nauseating, Charles. And I hope that those who are behind that, look at them, they are looking as if they are handling, hardened criminals. Look at children, scampering to get granite and water. And yet you tell me that you are trying them for treason. For God's sake, please, I think there has to be some lesson here. There have to be some people will have to pay for it. That is because there's no consequence for bad behavior in Nigeria, and that is why corruption and this other bad continued. There has to be a lesson drawn from why would you allow this? Even in law, it is there written. There are certain age of people that you do not remand, take them to, because what are you are even trying to radicalize them. You put them in prison with hardened criminals. What would they become when they come out? So it is really, this is one area where you think that, I'm short of words, but let government, I hope this is not, it does not stop at just his order, because that is what happens in our climb. He gives this order, these children are released, and that is the end of the case. We now move on. We shouldn't move on. We should please investigate this and let there be punishment for this kind of bad behavior. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ejime. And Professor Adeniyi, of course, beyond all that, I mean, Amnesty International described the whole detention saga as one of the deadliest attempts to suppress freedom of assembly so far. Does this speak to a high-handed approach against protesters who are rightfully demanding better governance in Nigeria, beyond the particular situation of these minors?
Well, first, Charles, before I go direct to your question, I think it's actually, like Paul said, that there are lessons for us to take from here. One lesson for me is that I think that there should be increased synergy in government, because we are seeing an arm of government arraigning minors, another arm intervening, and eventually the president coming in to say, release these children. If there was synergy, I'm sure an offense as serious as treason should have gone through some level of consultation before the decision was finally to arraign them. And I also want to make a distinction between legal justice and moral justice, or if you like, social justice. Yes, the Attorney General came out today or yesterday to say that there was nothing wrong in arraigning those children. Yeah, legally it might be right, but of course, in the eyes of the public, it's not really good for the optics to see minors being arraigned for a serious crime as treason. People who hardly know what they are doing. And finally, before I come to specifically to your question,
briefly, because we've just got about a minute.
No problem. Is the need for us to also be mindful of how these children came about in the first instance, because we didn't see much of their family coming to agitate for them. What kind of system are we running that creates the enabling environment, for the evolution or the development of children like this, And we need to be mindful of this bigger picture so that we can prevent a situation where they will be on the street, commit offense that government may find consider criminal. And above all, we also need a tolerance, on the part of government. The last administration, President Buhari actually charged somebody for treason or violation. It's not the kind of thing we want to hear in a democracy. And President Bola Ahmed Tinubu shouldn't be one, to further these traits consistent with the spirit of freedom of expression, which is integral to democracy, as the case could be.
Yeah, very good points there. And let's move on to the perhaps saddest news of all. This week, Nigeria's Army Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Taoreed Labaja, died after what was described as a period of illness. He died on Tuesday night in Lagos. The exact details of his illness have not been made public. He was appointed to the position in June last year, not long after President Tinubu came to office. He was often away from duty, sometimes out of the country, receiving treatment for an undisclosed illness, and had not been seen in public for some time, raising considerable concern. And let me come to you, Mahmood Jega. The passing of Lieutenant General Labaja, described as a significant loss for the Nigerian armed forces, where he is said to have played a pivotal role in numerous internal security operations. What's your reaction to that?
Honestly, it was a very sad moment, not only for his family and his colleagues, but for the whole country. I didn't know General Lagbaja personally, but I read a lot about him. Even when he was the general officer commanding, he was very active in the fight against banditry. He opened the Kaduna Birmingham Road, and he was seen personally leading the troops into the bush. And when he was appointed the army chief, he also showed a lot of vigor and dynamism. There was one video I remember from last year where he was addressing soldiers, and he immediately began doing all kinds of drills and exercises, and the officers behind him followed suit and the soldiers in front. So it was a shock to find that such a dynamic professional soldier suddenly fell sick, very sick, and in the end didn't make it. But of course, death can come to anyone, however fit and healthy. So we pray for the repose of his soul, and we hope that his successors in the military will carry on with the very good work of defeating insecurity in the country.
Indeed. And Paul Ejime, just continuing in his favor, he made it a point to ensure that the army would not intervene in Nigeria's democracy, especially after several neighboring countries experienced military coups. So he was seen as a sort of agent of democracy, wasn't he?
So let's begin by expressing our condolences to the family, the armed forces, and then the nation that we are losing such a gentleman officer. From all that has been said, he actually covered himself in glory as a military officer, a patriotic officer serving his nation. And so we have to, the lesson for me is in the management of public information. If you recall, before now, a week or 2 or 3 ago, there was reports, and it was revolved that he was hale and hearty. You know, this is the only place where we treat illness or death as if it cannot happen to anybody, even the presidency or everywhere. You hear the president of America when they are going for even surgery, it is made public. But here we couch everything in secrecy as if we are superhuman or we are immortal. That could have, let's show, by making people see that you are human, it will bring out the sympathy, the empathy from other people, instead of making it look as if this man is undiable. You have to, the way that information was managed, in between the time lag was just 1 week, when it was reported that he died. No, he didn't die, and then he said he died, and then there was an acting officer appointed to take his place, and suddenly the other officer was also promoted. I think it was not well managed. We should, when somebody is ill for whatever reason, that is not, we're all going to die. So make it clear that this is what is happening. The King of England is having, cancer, has gone on treatment and is public knowledge. So this is a part of the, the nuances in public information that we should learn. We tend to think that everything is a secret. No. Government is public, it's for the public. People put you in power. They ought to know what is happening. It doesn't change anything, because we can't tell when anybody is going to die. But that, for me, is where we need to draw some lesson. And again, our condolences to the family and the army.
Indeed, and Professor Adeniyi, of course, during his short tenure, at some points, Nigeria suddenly saw an increase in attacks by Boko Haram, as well as incidents of kidnapping across the country. Do you think his frequent absence as a result of illness had to do with it?
No, I don't think so. It could be one of many things, and of course the CDS was very, very active while he was away, And at some point we were actually wondering, when we were not seeing him until we started seeing snippets of information, that something was amiss, But like my colleagues have said, death is a necessary end that will come when it will come, like Shakespeare told us about 500 years ago. Every human being will all go at the appointed time. And the only thing that will not go is the legacy that every human being leaves behind, And of course, General Lagbaja left a legacy of service, a legacy of dedication. And of course, those legacies will definitely outlive him. But the other important thing to highlight is the need for us not to introduce superstition into government, where you want to hide information, imagining that somebody it does not mean well for you, or for one reason or the other. If superstition can thrive at the micro unit family level, it shouldn't be elevated to the governance level, where information is supposed to thrive, because information is the oxygen of good governance. And when we are continuously denied of this, even in the case of ill health of a significant public official, like the Army Chief of Staff, it's really unfortunate. But we understand that these things come as a result of fear, but those fear are things that shouldn't be found at the level of governance if we are to engender good governance, as the case could be.
Thank you, Prof. Those were good words. And on a final note, let me come to you, Mahmoud Jega, because you had raised the fact that he was an active soldier. I understand that under former President Buhari, he masterminded an onslaught on the insurgency in the north, personally leading a task force himself near Maiduguri in an area badly hit by the Boko Haram insurgency. So he was not an armchair general, was he?
No, he wasn't by any means. He was a real operations man, very dynamic. We saw many, even though I didn't see him personally, but there are lots of videos, even right now on the net, which showed the nature of the leadership that he provided in the army at various levels. So it was a real sad loss. But as my colleague said, probably the most unfortunate part of the whole saga was the information management. You know, even the government statement 2 nights ago or 3 saying that he died in Lagos on Tuesday night, I saw some media questioning that. They said, no, but he was actually abroad for quite some time receiving treatment, and that he died abroad and was flown into the country. I don't know what is the truth, but why should we lie about that? Why should we say someone died in Lagos if
Absolutely.
he died in New York? I mean, there is no gain in there.
And on that note, gentlemen, I want to thank you very much indeed for deepening our understanding of all the big news and issues from both here in Nigeria and around the world. Arise News analyst and former chairman of the editorial board of Daily Trust newspaper, Mahmood Jega, the current affairs analyst and dean of the School of Postgraduate Studies at Baze University, Abuja, Professor Abiodun Adeniyi, and of course the global security and governance analyst, Paul Ejime. Thank you very much indeed to all of you. That's it for this edition of Arise Prime Time. Join us again next week from me and the entire team here in Abuja. Bye-bye, and thank you for watching.